So it has been really interesting developments all around the world the past few days, right, Lyra? And I mean, we the last few episodes, even most of this year, especially after Trump's elections, we've been talking about there's a great paradigm shift all around the world. Of course, we saw it first with the trade and things like that, but now we are seeing, maybe even in the area of diplomacy in Middle East relations. So, and of course, back home, we talk about DAP previously in the episode, and of course, PKR internal election is getting hot also. So, we kind of want to tie up all the different elements we've been covering the past couple of episodes. But I think the big news, of course, I mean, today is 16th of May 2025, is really, I mean, this year, you can't really analyze or discuss any headline without referring to President Trump, right? And it's just that kind of difference, whether you like him or not, I think is kind of irrelevant, I think, because, that's the thing I always do when I talk to people. And you can feel because of the power of mainstream media, people are like kind of like very angst and having that negative feeling against him. But I always try to explain to people, look, it's not a matter of whether you like him or not. Everything he does have great impact all around the world, including Malaysia. So it's going to be better if we understand where he's coming from, what's his motivations. And I mean, the other day you were just talking about actually even when he doing his inauguration, his speech he already outlined everything. And it's as just people just didn't notice, but I guess maybe they are not used to politicians who did what they say.
Well, actually, that's so true. I mean, sad but true. So, but actually, it was kind of interesting because throughout his whole campaign, he has been pretty consistent.
That's right.
And even up to the inauguration day, and even his speech, literally just lay down a very, very solid plan. And just basically, you can see the shift, especially after the assassination attempt. And basically, I think he has really, really given it a hard, long thoughts about how he's going to run this whole administration. And it's like they don't lose any time at all. And it's really just so interesting because, I mean, the last round when a president was visiting Dubai, was it? It was like President Bush. And this time it's like President Trump. And they came. So a lot of the presidents are just coming with the agenda of like trying to maneuver the politics in the Middle East. And yet he comes with that, hey, we can achieve strength through peace, and it's really done through the way where if everyone is prosperous, no one is gonna be like wanting to get into terrorism and things like that. I think so. He really did make a very strategic move over there.
Yeah, very interesting. And I was just watching his speech, in Saudi, right? And how, the whole atmosphere, it really felt more like a Republican convention, right? We God bless America and things like that, all the song. But when he was making a speech, I just kind of saw like one line summarize it, right? And he was referring to previous administration. It's very introspective and very kind of gain a lot of respect because he said, look, America had a very bad reputation because you talk about the Bush, Cheney, all those people, they are into intervention. So I think these are the people we call the neo-conservative, right? And what's the term they use for Iraq and Afghanistan? Nation building. So even caused Arab Spring and things like that. But look at today, what is the fruit of Arab Spring? More terrorism, for example. But he didn't let the other side go. He called the Democrats. What's the word he used? Liberal non-profit. I just thought, wow, so brilliant. One line, he summed out the neocons and the Democrats. Basically, remember we did an episode, I think quite many seasons ago, about Uni Party. Basically, you have a permanent class in Washington and they just follow the trail of money. Doesn't matter you have a Republican president or Democrat president because at the end of the day, they are just, they have their own agenda. And of course, they are supported by a huge group of elite, Chamber of Commerce, nowadays big tech, central bankers and things like that. But finally, you have someone who wants the best, first America, but then when you apply the principle, it can actually be a blessing to other nations also. And from the reaction of the Middle Eastern leaders, they seem genuinely impressed, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, even the crown prince of Saudi Arabia was just driving Trump around
Yeah,
himself. I
himself.
mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, you talk about the sort of the highest honor that was being bestowed on a sitting president. I think that's pretty remarkable. And I mean, obviously, in the internet, you're gonna see like a lot of videos just showing the contrast between President Biden's visit to Saudi, and he had to go and meet the crown prince, and whereas this is like they are just there waiting for him.
Yeah, and the other thing, of course, really, I was just reading an article in Axios, right? Axios, of course, is former editor from Politico. So these are the Washington Insider and things like that, and they kind of reach out to a whole group of former Obama's staff, and they were all like kind of, I mean, of course, policy wise, they disagree with Trump and say he's reckless and things like that. But they were like somewhat impressed by the speed and just he was very decisive, especially when he decided to treat Syria as a friendly party. Now, of course, I think a lot of people.
That was kind of mind blowing though.
Yeah, indeed, and it's like no more sanction and things like that. But I think people sometimes miss the point, and that's really the art of deal, the art of negotiation by Trump, because he is not like welcoming Syria back without condition. And he was like, look, I'll take the sanction off. People, you are the rebels, right? You are different from Assad, but you used to be an Al Qaeda cell and things. So it's like, yeah, I mean, today, imagine if North Korea suddenly decided to have peace. You cannot say Kim Jong Un, all their family related people have to be, fired or things like. You can't do that. You basically have to just eliminate the whole country. So he is practical in that sense. But he also said a lot of things which the mainstream media did not cover. He was telling the Syrian president that I think it is in your best interest to enter into Abraham Accord. And I think you should kick out all the foreign terrorists. I mean, if they are Syrian, of course they should stay. But if they are foreign terrorists, they should be go. And then, and so you see the Syrian president kind of say, look, we will go back to our de-escalation policy, I think in 1974 or 76, So there is already impact, and they already is like, look, we are going to at least consider how we can work with Israel and things like that. Not necessarily work with Israel, how to coexist. And because the way I see it is he wanted Syria to be like a buffer, maybe, in the Middle East, because obviously he doesn't want to attack Iran, but you cannot be so weak that Iran can still go over your head. So he has a lot of, I just felt like this trip especially, people like to say that he is rash and things like that, but I see a lot of deliberation and planning in his foreign policy actually.
No, I think it was kind of interesting because all this thing happened after the announcement of tariff, and it's not prior. I mean, if it's prior, because in his first term, I think he would be like so eager to just go for Abraham Accords and things like that. And yet this one, he kind of like just let it simmer a little bit. And when things are like on the best terms for US to negotiate, and he comes to...
Do you think it's intentional?
I do think so. I think he's very strategic in terms of how he laid down the timeline for certain things to be run. And he's coming at such a time that is, I mean, you're just like leading up to Hari Raya Haji and things like that. And I thought it's kind of interesting because he kind of like laid a pattern for even a sense of liberation and even freedom that people don't normally see. Because technically, when you see like a certain nation that is just a single religion nation, they tend to be a bit more fanatic.
Yep.
And you would think that they are a bit more stringent. And yet here in Malaysia, we are being... basically, the policies on the halal certification is just being laid bare for the whole world to see. And yet, I mean, contrast that to Saudi and contrast that to, I mean, that's like literally the Mecca place. And people don't think of them as being that, like, I guess, like holier than thou sort of mindset. So
Right.
I guess that's kind of interesting because he basically, I think what's interesting about Trump is also, he's not like vindictive, as in like just going after his political enemies and just like, hey, I'm gonna just have to like eliminate you from ever serving again. So I don't think he comes with that sort of mindset, and really sets him apart when it comes to like setting certain policy. I mean, even just now when you're talking about Syria, I mean, normal mind would be like thinking, what are you doing? Like, because it's like ex-terrorists, and I mean, you're like kicking off like the old regime, and yet, I mean, basically it's a gone case for Assad. But it's still pretty bizarre to think that an ex-Al Qaeda, and you'll be thinking. I mean, even for me, I had to like do a bit of research and to just
Yeah.
see and think, why is he doing that?
Yeah, and remember he was there, a phone call, and Erdogan also joined in because Erdogan obviously very unfriendly with Assad. So I think it's really like, look, he is being fluid and open to different things. He was like, Zelensky and Putin, do you want to meet in Turkey? If you meet, I can change the plan and things like that. Now, I mean, he didn't say he can change the plan, but he was like, he kind of hinted that if Putin will be there, he might join. But when once it's confirmed that Putin doesn't want to be there, then he decided to leave also. So it's really that's the I would say it's a demonstration of his intuition. Of course, the other thing related to Syria, which caused a lot of unhappiness among some conservative and libertarian, will be Qatar, right? So the big fat luxurious plane coming to be temporary Air Force One, and so many people were triggered by that and say, how can you receive a personal gift? And I think he just went to social media and said, this is not a personal gift. They use all the four-letter word to describe all these people. But it kind of make people a bit uncomfortable, and I can understand why. So because we always knew like Qatar is it's not even so subtle in their support of terrorism. Not so subtle, but of course they like to say they don't. I mean, they own Al Jazeera and things like that. And Qatar, of course, is one of the major money laundering center in the world. I mean, just by virtue of the amount of wealth they have. But then when I start to do research, I realized America actually Qatar actually holds the only non-NATO ally base in Qatar. So obviously there is, regardless of what people want to call them, obviously there is some strategic partnering and things like that. And then of course, remember when he was there, Qatar announced the single biggest purchase of Boeing products in the
Yeah.
history of Boeing.
That was so mind blowing.
So for people would be like, oh, he's just greedy, he's just transactional. But hey, if I can get a supposed state that support terrorism, I mean, Qatar, of course, kind of hard to imagine they will sign Abraham Accord, but imagine everyone else is doing that.
Yeah, I mean, especially if Saudi Arabia is leading the way.
And this time he didn't, like what you were saying the other day, he was not forcing, because remember before the whole Hamas incursion, Saudi was so close. But this time I think it's even more meaningful because it's like nobody could accuse Trump of coercing. What did he say to MBS? He say, at your own time,
Yeah.
you can decide whether you want. And I don't know. This trip to me is maybe even more impressive than the things he had done in the trade. Of course, the trade is very, very impressive. The
Yeah.
trade is impressive in the sense he forced everyone to come on the table, and now everyone's paying 10% tariff, and they think it's a great deal. It's like, that kind of mind shift. But in terms of, wow, when he say, I'm a peacemaker, he really meant that.
Yeah, another thing that is noteworthy is also that he brought Elon Musk as well. And I think it's like the whole thing about Saudi is like they are moving from a very oil-based, oil-reliant economy and into like basically technology and innovation. And to have someone of that level to come and really just like, hey, I'm gonna like do this and that investment, and basically like just sharing AI technology and things like that. It's just
Starlink.
mind blowing. I mean, I've kind of like watched a session where Elon Musk was just basically being interviewed by the Minister of Communication in Saudi, and it was very, very interesting because they were very, very friendly and really, really just kind of like open minded about this whole thing, and actually even looking forward towards that sort of collaboration.
Yeah, and this episode kind of, I think, segue us into what I wanted to discuss, which is of course back to our country. We have the PKR election and things like that. But I think one of the things, of course, people will be saying it's a domestic kind of thing. But remember when we did the episodes, when Pope, when we the previous Pope Francis passed away, and we talk about globalism and things like that. But coming back again to the Middle East trip and the tariff, really, I think we are seeing really a contrast now. You have the globalism, which is always on the rise, but then suddenly with Trump, I mean, even you see in Canadian elections, Australia election, a lot of people don't mention it, but I really see there is some spirit of nationalism. And even if it's against Trump, but of course it's very ironic, I think, because Trump is the one that is freeing everyone from globalism. And if he allows the liberal to be elected, fine, they could maybe move into more center. So, but anyway, with that, you kind of come back to Rafizi versus Nurul, which we kind of talked about in the last episode, but it's getting a bit heated up, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've had like certain comments that I've kind of like seen that say that actually, what Rafizi is doing is actually pretty calculated, I suppose, in the sense that he's like, hey, what will people think if the daughter is to lose?
Yeah, it's very sarcastic, but it's very tactical also, because like just today, I mean, it's always like Friday, and Maria Motta has been writing a few opinion, of course. I mean, but I had to say she probably represents the Pakatan Harapan supporter that is more idealistic, reform centric kind of
Yep.
voter. I think it's fair to say that she is representative of those people. And so what's the article she wrote today? Apple polishers, right? Talking about all the PKR people who come out in great supporter. And that's really the danger for Nurul, right? That, I mean, actually when she decided to come in hard, I really felt like she had miscalculated, even though I feel like she will win quite easily because of PMX status and things like that. But in long run, I really felt she miscalculated. A few reasons, because she just hasn't been very involved. And when she was involved, remember all the idea, it's very liberal, very progressive kind of thing. But you see, what's worse is if she becomes another version of PMS. You sounded like you want to be a reformer and a liberal person, and yet you are stuck in the old ways, basically the UMNO ways, which we are seeing PMS. So I think that would be even more damaging than if you go out and say, look, I want to be a globalist liberal, rather than you say that and then you actually still going to use race, religion as a method of control, which is what PMS is showing right now. So just don't think it's going to end very well for her.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of sad also because it's, I mean, a lot of people are thinking that it's kind of like not the right time for her to do that. I mean, like what you mentioned, because
But
I
a
mean,
lot of the media, the Chinese media are like very supportive. Why
yeah,
do you think so?
well, I guess she does. I mean, she does appear to be a bit more charismatic in comparison to Rafizi. Not to say that Rafizi doesn't.
Is it because of Rafizi non-performance?
I suppose so. I think it's like because prior to this, we kind of like talk. I mean, about
Why he didn't perform, right?
yeah, and
Was
probably
he
there's a lot
sabotaged
of
by PMS?
exactly. So I think because of that, sort of like a lot of I don't know, like hearsay and things like that, and basically people probably loses faith. I mean, you kind of have to find a scapegoat, right? I mean, if the PMX is not performing, who's his advisor? And
Yeah, I mean, Rafizi as scapegoat is just is too convenient, right? But you did mention, I think, in the last episode that you felt it's a bit different from DAP wanting to remove Lim Guang En. And I think you explained it well, because it's like this one is different. This one is more like suddenly you prop out someone. And I think the other thing also people don't realize is, I mean, assuming, let's say the next general election, you have a very similar result, then prime ministership will come from PKR. And he can be president for one more term in PKR, then he'll be 80s already. then whoever is the deputy president most likely will succeed. I mean, assuming they're within the 30 to 40 seat range, then and DAP have the same, to combine their close to 100, then they'll surely will form government.
Do you reckon that PMX is trying to build like a family politics sort of situation?
Well, remember when he was away, Wan Aziza became president, and then now with this. I mean, of course, in the early days, Nurul, they're all same generation as Azmin Ali and things like that. Everyone kind of say they're all prime minister material, right? Even Rafizi, people say he's prime minister material. But Nurul, really, I don't think she has much to show. So that kind of reinforced the whole family promotion kind of theme, right?
But do you reckon that they are also kind of like seizing the opportunity whereby the world is a bit more, I guess, susceptible to feminism?
Definitely. That's the other thing. So today, for example, in Australia, Liberal Party, which is now, of course, the coalition, they elected a female leader. So all around the world, there is this kind of tendency that if you have comparable candidate, or even if the male candidate is just a little bit better than the female, then most likely the female candidate will become the leader because of this, DEI, right? I mean, feminism is like one of the original DEI bedrock.
Yeah, it's kind of sad though, because I mean, feminism started off as a movement whereby, I mean, women get like, you have like equality that is being afforded to women, but it's actually mostly for work purposes and voting rights. I mean, all those things, I think these are great human
Universal
rights.
suffrage is fine,
Yeah.
But when you kind of put and say that, we talk about it like DAP, CEC, they have what's the quota? 40%? Which,
It's
frankly speaking,
huge.
is very, very ridiculous, I find, because it's like you should look at the percentage of our members and things like that. To put I mean, of course, maybe it's not arbitrary, but I'll call it arbitrary. I mean, now I think about it, it's really ridiculous.
But I guess it's worthwhile if you get like another Margaret Thatcher sort of person.
Yeah, of course. So there's a lot of discussion now, in terms of, I mean, of course, we can use gender as a benchmark, but it's also like, remember the Google engineer who talk about, male more suitable or female more suitable to be an engineer, and he got fired over that. But I think it's worth talking, who is regardless of gender, regardless of race, who is the most suitable one. And I mean, of course, it's just a coincidence, but at the moment, from the conservative point of view, like American Supreme Court, the 4 female Supreme Court justices are the most unreliable one in terms of upholding the Constitution.
Yep.
Unfortunately, Barrett has become like them, and the other 3, and it's just. Did you read today? Like, for example, they were talking about the citizen birthright case that began the oral argument, and I think so. Of course, it's a case brought by the government. So the Solicitor General began to present point and things like that, and Justice Elena Kangan was like, keep on interrupting until Roberts have to shut her up. So it's like, Justice, can you allow the council to finish? So no, I'm not saying it, but it's a coincidence, that so it kind of, this is the kind of thing that caused people to be like, maybe this kind of quota is really not good. I'm sure there are. I mean, when I was in Australia, I remember one of my lecturer is a magistrate, is a female magistrate. She has 25 years experience, very, very good. So you can get the right person, but if you get the person because or merely because of his race and gender, I think that's where you get into trouble.
Yep, agree.
But anyway, we are kind of outside. But anyway, it comes to PKI again. And now, let me ask you this. Do you think the election, I mean, of course, okay, the first thing, do you think, I think you're of the opinion that Nurul probably will win, right?
Yes.
I mean, barring any silent, I mean, they already control. You can almost see like even at branch level, the election is kind of fixed. Because previously I wanted to talk about because they use online voting, which is like the first of its kind. But of course, then I realized I don't know enough to talk about it. And I mean, they say they use blockchain and things like that. Because after there's some accusations of improper behavior, right? They even get the IT audit. Like the whole report was published. But all these things, I mean, if you're in consultation industry, people can just come up with any kind of report. But online voting, do you think that's... And PMX the other day was saying that he will make voting easier for people who are not in Malaysia.
That honestly, I think is something that would be great, because...
But is this a Pandora box you're willing to open?
I don't see it as a Pandora box. Actually, I felt like if there is, why not utilize technology? But I think in such a way that is constitutional, in the sense that, I mean, obviously you have to like have law pass, and I mean, obviously you have to have certain ways of like having to verify the voter's ID and things like that. So with that, and if everything is like secure and there is no possibility of basically
cheating or backdoor.
I would say, why not? I mean, you
Yeah,
utilize all
true.
this technology and things like that. So, and I guess it will also be sort of fun, I suppose, for the younger generation to actually be a bit more interested about politics in this nation. And because all this thing, I mean, like it or not, it affects their future. It affects everyone's future. But coming back to this, I do feel that Nurul Izzah stands a great chance of winning, probably because of
for all the support and things
the
like that.
backing from the PMX. So I think with that, well, I don't know. I mean, like what Rafizi is saying is kind of like a double-edged sword, in the sense that I'm not sure if he's like genuinely does worry about the Prime Minister or worried about his own position.
It felt like he just want to go out with guns blazing, and he's doing it with as little emotion as possible. But undoubtedly, he wants people to know that you may regret your choices. And then, of course, he went on releasing some data and things like that, remember, which initially I want to get into, but I decided maybe not now. Let's just wait for the election, because the result and repercussion, it will kind of vibrate for months to come.
Yep.
So that's very interesting. I think we can just leave this topic for now. And finally, of course, we have to update a little bit on all the trade thing that's happening. Of course, Malaysian team is going to US again. And last episode we talked about the UK deal, right, which kind of really set a benchmark. And I think that some of the ministers were having at the APEC meeting, right, recently. I heard South Korea and other nations were like, trying to negotiate closer, and India, I think, got sidetracked with the Kashmir thing, but they came back again and said they want to drop all tariff. But of course, I mean, it sounds very good on paper, but America is not looking for the dropping of tariff; it's looking for overall trade barrier. And of course, it's going to be like cherry on the cake if you do that. So, but let's talk about the one of the points we kind of mentioned very, very early on, which is when Trump announced the reciprocal tariff, everyone say inflation.
Yep.
So have you been reading some of the economic news from America for May? I think April data is out, right? So for example, now it's May, they'll get April data. So I saw this headline in Politico, right, a few days ago. And the headline is, Trump tariffs have little impact on prices so far, defying green forecast. Politico, okay? Then, of course, you have conservative side like the Federalists, Federalists, of course, they are more into... So this article say, and which is, media kept routine for a tariff-driven recession. The data keep disappointing them. So I was just watching the podcast Alex Marlow with what was the economist guy? I cannot remember his name.
John
Carney, and And Kanye, I always find, because Kanye, of course, he used to work with CNBC, so he's very, very mainstream. So I think one of the things why Kanye could do such a sharp reporting is because he really know how the mainstream media is going to think and what kind of argument they came up with. And he was saying that every time, and I haven't looked in detail, but he said every time you have a Republican, but especially Trump, because when Trump came in, he also did the same thing. And remember when we talked about it in a few episodes ago, we said that time we have a small sample of what tariff could do. Of course, it's very, very limited to China and things like that, not like a worldwide reciprocal tariff. And he said at that time the data clearly points to deflation. But he said everyone likes to claim that there is inflation because it's going to make Trump administration look back. So he said the inflation estimation is always higher under Trump. So I haven't looked into this data. So that means it's very, very similar to how people start to, like today there's a polling and say Trump's approval rating is 51%. DeSantis' approval rating in Florida is 55%. It's like apple and oranges. Why are you even comparing? One is a state, one is a president of a country that is having thousands of dealing around the world. But that's how they use a poll to kind of shape the mind, right? Like Biden is leading, Harris is leading. Remember the pollster was forced to retire. So looks like it's another this kind of thing. But what do you make of all this thing? I mean, I haven't looked into this, but it's really not beyond mainstream media to continue this kind of bullshit, right?
Yeah, I mean, personally, when I read all this thing, I do think that there is a certain agenda that the mainstream media is trying to push, and obviously they are rooting for recession, and yet, I was like kind of like just watching Sky News, and I mean they're pretty mainstream, right?
Sky News Australia or
UK.
UK is very mainstream. Australia one is slightly more center conservative.
Yeah, but I was watching UK concerning the Trump's visit to the Middle East, and they seem to be pretty.
Trigger.
I would say they are kind of like impressed, but
Impressed. Okay. That's a.
I mean, but it's like there is a bit of shift, but it's also kind of like selective in a sense. So
there is a shift, definitely. I agree.
yeah, but I do think that it's because it's like the overwhelming support from the citizens are. I mean, you can't kind of like suppress it any longer. So that's why. But I think genuinely the reporter was kind of like impressed as well. But coming back to this, it's like generally I think mainstream media has been like the echo chamber for so long the time, and especially for the liberal nonprofit, and basically the data just keep disappointing them. I think maybe someone on the top management has kind of like, hey, maybe we should be doing something different. But I mean, obviously it takes a lot of Jeff Bezos to kind of like, hey, I mean, we're not gonna go into DI and things like that. But generally, I think they are still at that sort of mode of like anti-Trump, and maybe I'm
definitely
not convinced with what Trump is doing yet. It's still too early to tell. It's just 100 days. I mean, all this sort of nonsense.
But the data keep disappointing them.
Correct. So and obviously they have to sell certain news, right? And we always say that tragedy news always sells better than the good news. So I think maybe that's what they have been educated for so long the time, and it has worked thus far until they met Trump.
Yeah, I mean, generally the media just prefer more negative news. It's true. But of course, in terms of if your economy is winning and there's a lot of revenue and the country is doing so well, they can afford to have more tax break, then I imagine people will welcome this kind of news. I mean, imagine our newspaper kind of say, oh, government budget, this year, everyone who earn 150,000 annually, no income tax.
Do you reckon that they are doubling down though on trying to prove that they were right?
I think so, definitely. But they are finding it harder and harder. And I think we also mentioned this in some of the episode. The liberation of ads really is game changing. And not only that, then you have all the new medium for people are saying that the Western world, but especially the Americans, they consume politics like entertainment.
Yeah.
So you know, when the MSM kind of kept disappointing them, that's why all the podcasts become so important. So I imagine a lot of people, especially the conservative and the right, are getting their news mainly from ads. And of course, people like Rahim Kassan, they don't like ads so much because they say there's a lot of filtering, there's a lot of rubbish, which is true. But compare that with echo chamber or mainstream media, I think I still chose the other one. And interestingly, today, even on ads, somebody was just saying, you know, the problem with being in echo chamber for so long is they are in a position where they couldn't cope. So that's why when there's a pushback, they really don't know how to handle it. And so you'll be very surprised that why people still, I mean, so often, right, you see like the mainstream media, they go to White House, they ask the same dumb questions and they got hammered again and again, either by the press secretary or by Trump. And this guy was explaining that because they were in echo chamber for so long, like imagine you are a boss, everyone say you are the greatest, the company is doing well, then all of a sudden you get a different perspective. Actually, you're not doing so well, you're doing very badly. But you can't handle it if you only hear praises for the last 5 to 10 years. So that's a part I am a bit sympathetic to them, but of course, maybe not really. But it's like, you know, how to change. It's not easy, right? I mean, we have seen again and again, every time there's a paradigm shift with COVID, now with the trade war, if a country cannot adjust, and that's the part that kind of excites me, but also give me a lot of concern, because Malaysia has great opportunity to shift, to pivot differently. But if we don't do it and we still say, you know, we you know, race is still very important, you know, affirmative action is still very important, then we talk about it already, right? You know, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos may overtake us.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the trade update. So I think we pretty much cover all the things we wanted to do, right?
Yep.
But anyway, every week there's always interesting things. And yeah, I mean, we like to cover more local news, but there's just not a lot happening. But I really hope, like with a meaty delegation going to, I think, Washington again, that do you, okay, this is the last question. Do you think that nations that strike a deal with US first will have some advantage?
Oh, definitely. I mean, they set the tone.
Yeah, so Malaysia shouldn't, I really felt we shouldn't drag our feet, because we are not like Vietnam, we are not like South Korea, we are not like Japan. You know, what US demand of us is nowhere comparable to those countries. So we can actually pivot quite easily if we are willing. I felt that from day one. I still feel it. So yeah, hopefully Zafro and team, you know, and
We'll do a great job.
yeah, generally you see the American official, when they talk about Malaysia, is in positive tone. They always see us as not extreme, fairly neutral. I mean, of course, Najib time, you know, even though trade with China is the biggest, but you have a lot of other things like investment, IP, and things like education, things like that. So in that sense, US and China influence, you can even argue maybe American influence in Malaysia is greater in terms of the holistic. So I really don't think it's that hard to strike a deal. So hopefully we can be the first in ASEAN, right?
Yeah. Well, that would be very interesting.
I think they will really, yeah, they will help PMS a lot, I feel. Like in terms of finally something that can be classified as a win. You know? But anyway, we'll see how it goes. So as usual, if any question, any topic you want us to cover more, then we will be glad to do.
Yeah.
So until next time, bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.